And Shanessa and Lexi and Brian. Wow. It's good to come together on God's day in God's house. Sorry, my mind's flashing forward and it's not so good. I enjoy being with my church family. For those of you visiting, it's next month is my last Sabbath here, so it's kind of hard to say goodbye. Oh, I guess I could share a screen. Would you like to have the Bible verses up on the screen? Actually, before sharing, I should have scrolled forward and gotten it to the right place so you don't see all the other stuff in between. There we go. These things here, my son has a name for them. They're boomer fingers. And people that are 20 or so and younger, they can just real quick make things work. And those of us who are maybe 2.5 times that or close to 3 times that, we don't do it quite the same. That's not expanded out. Here we go. Okay. What if? So, real quick deal. Why is it so hard to face change? I know I'm wrestling with some of that myself. I love to just get in a rut, be in the groove. Some of you will not relate to this. I know that in our family, my wife likes to have a lot of new things, so every meal is a new adventure. And when we got married, I started learning a whole new variety of tastes, which already had happened. I had served as a student missionary in another country and learned to enjoy their food. And my wife brought all kinds of, in my home growing up, we had a predictable routine. What we ate on Tuesday this week is kind of like what we'd eat on Tuesday next week. We might have 3 or 4 kind of very familiar menus and another 3 or 4 occasionally rotated in. I used to tell my class, I didn't have to tell my classmates, they'd look, and inside my lunch they already knew what I'd be eating, except for one thing. There'd be one thermos with the mystery inside, the hot something that mom or dad had put in the thermos for me that day, and everything else was the same. Applesauce on homemade bread and a little container of peanuts on the side. And 9 years later, I loved it. I'm happy in my rut. And when you start changing things, I feel a little threatened and insecure, which is quite different in our home where, my wife likes to have all kinds of new and interesting things. Now, I remember when I was working in a lifestyle center at Weimar, California, I was in the college side of things, but those on the lifestyle side, they'd sit at the table and look at that plate and think, oh, I don't even know what some of this stuff is. In fact, on this plate are a couple of items I didn't know what they were until I got married. I never had eaten avocado. Isn't that crazy? Anyway, my wife from California, avocados are like from the tree of life or something. Anyway, so I enjoy this good food, but some of it was a new adventure. What is this? And in Korea, of course, there were lots of new adventures. I put things in my mouth and I did not know what was going down. I enjoyed it. Normally I enjoyed this stuff, but graduation. You get in the routine, every year, all through the year, you can expect certain teachers are this way, and you study the teachers. How can I, produce what that teacher requires? Then suddenly you're in a business, and the boss is not like the teacher in math class, or like that social sciences class, or whatever it was. The boss has very specific expectations, and you're trying to fit in. Or another one I don't have a picture for is marriage itself. That's all new, right? You wake up after you get married and you have 2 lives, 2 histories, 2 families blending. And then eventually something happens, like Precious is here, Stephen's out of the country, and you look and there's that empty place. I know when my wife's gone, I look and there's that empty place. It's like I used to be a whole person, now I'm half of a couple. That kind of feeling. And I used to be, some people might actually enjoy that. It's like, okay, now I just do my own thing for a little while. But Absence makes the heart grow fonder. Sometimes the change comes because some new law came. And we think, uh-oh, how do I work with this thing? How do I work with this new legislation or this new person that's in the office, in the country, in the White House, or in the Capitol building, or in the Illinois Congress? I'm looking at a story where Jesus comes to deal with change and a man who struggles with the change. If you have a Bible, please come with me to Mark chapter 9. Last time I was here, we were in Mark chapter 5 predominantly, jumping around to chapters 7 and 8 a little bit. Mark chapter 9, starting in verse 14. And when he came to the disciples, this is about Jesus. Actually, I'll pause while you're looking it up. The first half of this chapter, the first 13 verses, are about Jesus and 3 disciples, handpicked, Peter, James, and John, going up on the little mountain. And way up on the mountain, Jesus was transfigured in front of them. They were shocked. I mean, he was surrounded by this dazzling light, and 2 beings, Moses and Elijah, appeared and talked with him. Luke chapter 9 tells us they talked to him periton exodona too, about his exodus, his departure. His experience of Calvary would follow in the footsteps of Israel in the exodus out of Egypt. I would love to chase that rabbit today. We're not going to. Okay. So when he came to the disciples, this is Jesus plus 3 coming to the 9. They 3 plus Jesus had a tremendous experience on the mountain, but as they came down, the first thing he saw a great multitude around them and scribes disputing with them. I know these aren't scribes, but sometimes you get that feeling, it's this way. No, it's not that way. And it might be, some kind of meeting where you're trying to plan for the future of the organization, or it might be in the home. It might be between parents and children, and it's this way. No, it's that way. And these scribes, as we read between the lines, they found an opportunity too good to miss. In fact, as we start reading what came next, they pounced on this opportunity to try to humiliate Jesus and his followers. Immediately when they saw him, all the people were greatly amazed and running to him greeted him. Now you can tell if you're coming and all of a sudden people come running up to you, something's going on usually. Now, if it's your family, they're just happy to see you. They come running to see you. But imagine you're a firefighter and you step up to a building and people come running to you. That's usually not a good sign. Somebody's hurt, there's a fire, you're a police officer. I wonder if the first few days in actual service as a police officer, you get this feeling like, oh no, call the police. Oh yeah, that's us. You want the other guy to do it. And Jesus, they came running to him, and he could tell something's up, sure enough. Imagine what it was like for those 3, Peter, James, and John, and this is just, a happy picture in the sky, but they saw the brilliance of God. I wonder if it was like Exodus 34. Remember what happened when Moses was in God's presence? And when he came down, Moses tells what happened next. It's like, go away, cover your face, because it was glowing. There was still light emanating from his face after time with God. Do you suppose there was some light emanating from Peter, James, John, and Jesus' faces when they came down? Matthew, Mark, and Luke don't say anything about it. John doesn't even tell the story. Well, he hints at it later in one of his letters, but that's another deal. So imagine they're coming down. Maybe there's even a glow, but even if there was no light glowing from their faces, you look different when you had an experience like that. I mean, when you walk into a room and you look at some people's eyes and you see some kind of, like energy, like, oh, wow, you can tell if somebody just got really good news. You can tell if somebody's struggling with a problem. You can see the cloudy expression or the cheerful, brilliant expression. He asked the scribes, what are you discussing with them? That's interesting. You've got all these people. You have some that have come wanting to see Jesus, some that are arguing, all that discussion, and Jesus just walks right into it. He may not have heard a word they said, but he could see what was happening. Remember, he could read the heart. We saw that earlier in Mark's gospel, that he could read what was happening in their hearts. And he said, what are you discussing with them? All of a sudden, well, let me back up. If you were in the classroom, I'm taking you way back to when you were in school, or some of you, it is not way back. And the teacher walked in, and all of a sudden, everything stopped. And the teacher said, what were you doing? Or maybe you were at home, and your mom walked into the room, or your dad. What were you doing? And, you have to walk in right now. It seems like always somebody knows right the moment to walk in. Then one of the crowd answered, obviously not one of them. One of the crowd answered and said, Teacher, I brought you my son who has a mute spirit. How did he bring Jesus his son and Jesus wasn't even there? If you really think about this, it might change this week in your life. There are people that come looking for Jesus and they find you. And you can represent him or maybe not. Unfortunately, on this day, I'm reading between the lines because we read off and on how these people argued over who's the greatest. I think Luke tells that in his version of the story, Luke 9. When this was done, that argument came again. So imagine if you're arguing, who's greater? I'm better. No, I'm better. And then Jesus chooses three. Okay, you, and you, come with me. And everyone else is saying, why them? I'm the greatest. Why did he take that one instead? So while they're having that tussle, this man shows up with a very specific request for Jesus. Whenever the Spirit seizes him, it throws him down. He foams at the mouth, gnashes his teeth, and becomes rigid. I spoke to your disciples that they should cast it out, but they could not. Now, when Jesus sent the disciples out, what did he tell them they could do? They can cast out demons. So they did. They went out, and we read, at least in Matthew's gospel account, in Matthew 10, we read about them going out and doing this and coming back. This is Jesus' last year of ministry. So they've done this a while, but it didn't work. Now, how embarrassing is that? I think back to 2012. Remember when you'd listen to family radio? Maybe you never did. And you'd hear Harold Camping on May 21, 2012, Jesus is coming again. Very confident. At one point, his confidence was challenged by Doug Batchelor. Remember, he said, I want to sign a contract with you that on May 22, your entire radio network will belong to my organization. It was for a couple $100,000, very cheap. And you don't need it, right? Jesus is coming, May 21. Harold Camping wouldn't sign. There's that little doubt. And sometimes a little doubt can grow into a bigger doubt. And here are these people that, as they faced, the disciples, as they faced this demon, maybe there was that little doubt. Later we see, yes, there was. Jesus identifies it. Anyway, I spoke to your disciples that they should cast it out, but they could not. Now I want to pause for a moment and ask about stuff that might come to you that's scary, where you are afraid God will let you down. God said, cast out demons. They tried and failed. Think about Jonah. Go preach. In 40 days, Nineveh will be destroyed. If you read chapter 4, Jonah chapter 4, why was he afraid to go? Yes, Assyria was terrible. They persecuted people and all that. That wasn't his fear. Why does Jonah say he didn't want to go? He said, because I knew that you might forgive them. Yes, you're merciful. And I'd preach this and I'd look like an idiot because it wouldn't happen. Can you imagine how it felt to be Bartholomew? In the name of Jesus, come out. And the demon just mocks. Ha ha ha, you think you can get me out? Sort of like, what is it, Acts 19, where 7 sons of Sceva try this. And they say in the name of Jesus, well, I know Jesus, I know Paul, but I don't know you. And he tears them up. So it's a horrible day when you do what you think God wants you to do, and he's not there for you. Or it seems like he's not there for you. And sometimes this is one of our worries when we hesitate to stand for something because there's this nagging doubt. Will he really be there for me? If I take this stand, will God come through the journey with me? Jesus, answered him, the Father, and said, it's interesting, he addresses the whole group, even though it says he answered him, the Father. O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? Even though he's looking at the dad, the message is going to people around. The disciples lacked faith, and the instigators of that doubt are right there. Not priests. These were scribes. These are people more like my personality, attention to detail. Some people are big picture people. I'm not really good with the big picture. I'm more of a detail, look at the nitty-gritty stuff and try to build a picture. Scribes, can you imagine when I read in this Bible, for example, in my Hebrew Bible, I come there to Leviticus and I get to, it's somewhere around chapter 11, I see this verse with a little letter that's bigger than all the other letters. It's the letter wow in the middle of the word chon. And then there's a note in the margin. This is the middle letter of the Pentateuch. And I think, what? You guys count? They were giving attention to detail. And they were trying to make it perfect. So these are the people that could zero right into your weakness and humiliate you with it in public. And they were doing a great job. You guys can't do it. So you think that Jesus is the Messiah. Where's your evidence? You're casting out, like you cast out this demon. Why should we believe in you? Why should we think that you are truly serving the Messiah? And we find that often our biggest challenge when we face comments or questions of doubt is because they echo something that's already inside. And so when I hear those words and I think, I've actually been wondering that myself, and it amplifies my weakness, and the devil jumps on that opportunity. Jesus continues, how long shall I bear with you? Bring him to me. Then they brought him to him. And when he saw him, immediately the spirit convulsed him, and he fell on the ground and wallowed, foaming at the mouth. What had these guys seen earlier? Peter, James, John, Andrew, Philip, Bartholomew, all these. What had they seen? They had seen, chapter 5, Jesus cast demons, a legion of demons out of that guy. Matthew tells us it's really 2 guys. They'd seen it. So they should have known, this stuff happens, these demons submit. And they should not have been afraid, but it just didn't work. There he is, and they can't make it stop. And strangely, in the middle of all that intense stuff, Jesus calmly continues. So he asked his Father, how long has this been happening to him? Imagine if the fire department came roaring up to your house, sirens blaring and the lights flashing, and you see flames licking out the west side of your house, and the chief comes out with his white cap on, so you know he's the chief, his white helmet, and he walks up to you and says, so, how long has your house been burning? You would be so upset. And I think this father was pretty frustrated. My son needs help right now, and you are dilly-dallying with details. How long? Anyway, he answered, from childhood. Now, it's almost like you can imagine, if you have to sit in front of a clock, it makes it much worse. Imagine if you were waiting for someone, like you're in the doctor's office, and he's busy with someone else, and one physician we went to for the first baby we were going to have. This physician was, I guess, the best obstetrician in the town. Everybody wanted to be to this doctor, Dr. Craig, and so we'd wait sometimes half an hour to an hour in the waiting room, long line, and then he took whatever time you needed when you stepped in his presence. He'd just take time and make sure you got what you needed. I've got you covered. But when you'd sit there, if you looked at a clock, it makes it seem like forever if you're waiting for someone or something and you just notice the time creep by. Now, the same thing happens on death row. Your last, let's say, 8 days before execution, oh man, time just drags. Every little detail's amplified. I only know that from what people have said. I've never been on death row. But how long? has this been happening to him from childhood. Oops, why is it bumping back and forth? Often he's thrown him both into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. It's like this frustration. I'm facing this crisis, and you're just talking to me about how long, but there's a deadly little word in here. If. Jesus said to him, and I'm going to read it the way it's written in my New King James Version, if you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes. I want to back up. When you read it in Greek, they've got this thing in the New Testament, down here in my little Greek New Testament, you've got notes. Sometimes some of these notes show up in the margins of your study Bibles, which happens to be the case with this one. And the scribes in the Greek New Testament, they recorded this, it's just a couple letters different. They record it two different ways, according to which old book you have open. One says, just like I just read, if you can believe, all things are possible to him who believes. What a number of Bible scholars think may have been the original form, which is shorter, but either way, it's a powerful statement, is, if you can, all things are possible to him who believes. Now, why is that interesting to me? It's because if this is the way Jesus actually said it, which is possible, notice what he's doing. What had the Father just said in verse 22? But if you can do anything, have compassion on us and help us. And Jesus turns that around and quotes a piece of his sentence and says, if you can. Your biggest problem is the way you started your sentence. If you can. And then he maybe paused and said, all things are possible to him who believes. What's the problem with doubt? Well, from this story, it unplugs us from the power of God. He had Jesus Christ, Son of God, standing in front of him. And he said, if you can. But don't we do that sometimes? What are the things that might be in your life if you can? Maybe it's like, I always lose my temper. When people do this and this and this, if you can, please help me to get a handle on my anger. Or another one, okay, my life. I've got to live somewhere after we go there. I have no idea. I mean, we're looking in a certain zone, so we're thinking we're going to go look this coming week. We'll look, where will we stay? And I can be tempted to pray, if you can, find us the place where we should live. What kind of prayer is that? Or maybe you're thinking about a situation with a medical problem in the family. We have those. We have some of them in our prayer request. And we don't know sometimes which way to pray. Because I might be asking God to pray, God to intervene in a way that is not his will. That's different. That's like Jesus prayed, not my will, but yours be done. There's a subtle difference between if you can or if it is your will at this time. Those are it's a subtle difference, but it's very significant and important. If you can. Another one, maybe you have an interpersonal conflict with an individual. Like, this person we could never make this work. And you take it to the Lord. Lord, if you can, if possible. What do you mean, if you can? God has all power. So even if he doesn't take away the interpersonal conflict, you know one thing. He can help you on your side of it so that you're able to deal with it. That's the only promise. He doesn't promise peaches and cream day by day. He promises strength to face it, the ability to go through it. Think about what is it in your life right now that there's that if you can risk where you want to come to the Lord and the devil's going to nudge you to if. And Jesus says, all things are possible to him who believes. So the thing he needed most was the thing he didn't have. And this man was very wise. I don't know how smart he was. What's the difference between wise and smart? Smart with my own intellect. I can figure out all kinds of things. Wise, I know when to use this or not to use this as my next step. Smart people do some pretty unwise stuff. And often the last words they say when they do that is, hey, look at this. Anyway. So the thing he needed most is the thing he didn't have. It was faith. And so what did he do? How do you get what you don't have? Come with me to the next verse. 24. Immediately the father of the child cried out and said with tears, Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief. I believe. He did not believe fully Jesus could heal that boy. And he realized, you just pointed out, I lack that faith. So what do I know? I believe you can help me to believe. So he went underneath the problem. Give me the one thing that holds you back from doing your powerful action in my life. Help my unbelief. You may be that way. Too often we just give up. Like, I'm Irish. I've got a temper, or, whatever. We put it to our past. My mom was always this way. My dad is this. We blame somebody else. Well, how can I help but do this if so-and-so? But instead of blaming everyone, what if I go down and say, okay, so what I say and do or lack is all based on one basic lack. I lack faith. Help my unbelief. There's so many ways that this is needed, and we just mentioned some of them, but you can think of some I'd never thought about. It might be every time I see this, I find out it's in my body. I drink it or eat it, and I know I shouldn't do that. Or every time I get in the car, the next thing I know, I'm way over the speed limit. Or every time, does it have to be that way? Or can it be that I can turn to the Lord and say, Lord, I'm not getting anywhere with this thing in my life. Give me faith. Help my unbelief. Lord, I believe. Help my unbelief. Verse 25, when Jesus saw that the people came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit. And the man's probably thinking, yes, finally you said, saying to a deaf and dumb spirit, I command you, come out of him and enter him no more. In this case, this was a different spirit. This wasn't the kind that you just tell it to be gone and it's gone. This one Jesus could recognize for whatever reason he'll be back. And I don't want him coming back. There was a battle. We have Jesus who had just heard the words on the mountain, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. We heard that we hear that two other times in Mark, right? At the baptism. Or in Mark's writing, you are my beloved Son. And the other one is the centurion at the cross. Truly, this was the Son of God. So 3 times Mark tells the story about this is, or you are, or truly, this is the Son of God. But this story comes right after the statement of faith. There's a story of doubt. These people who were doubting did not have the full advantage of seeing Moses and Elijah. And they had the doubt. Then the Spirit cried out, convulsed him greatly, and came out of him, and he became as one dead, so that many said he is dead. And you can imagine if you saw him just down there, splatted on the ground, and too late. Let's get away from that horrible image, okay? But Jesus took him by the hand, lifted him up, and he arose. Just think about in your life, where do you need his touch, his hand to grasp that thing and push it out or pull it in according to what it is, to bring in something you've been struggling. It's like Paul writes in Romans chapter 7, the stuff I know I should do, I can't do, and the stuff I should not be doing, I am doing. O wretched man that I am, who can deliver me from this body of death? And then chapter 8 is that hand reaching out. There is no condemnation, therefore, to those who walk in Christ Jesus. I can imagine, Mark did not tell this part, but I'm just imagining, after the guy is back up, he's not dead, he looked like he's dead, but Jesus lifts him up. I can just imagine that dad grabbing his boy, is like, yes, you will never again get thrown into water or fire. You are healed. You are well. Now, some people call it epilepsy, and they Anyway, it happens to overlap in some of the symptoms, but Matthew, Mark, and Luke are very clear. It was a demon that did this to him. And it was such a frustrating demonic possession because he couldn't speak or hear. And now he could speak and hear, and he was no longer controlled by them. When he had come into the house, his disciples asked him privately, "Why could we not cast it out?" You notice they have the same problem as the dad. The dad didn't believe. The scribes didn't believe. The disciples didn't believe. But the dad did one thing different. I recognize my unbelief. Please help my unbelief. Anyway, Jesus gave them one more piece. This kind can come out by nothing but prayer and fasting. They had cast out many demons. They had experience. But sometimes it's bigger. I want to pause and say something Mark did not explicitly say. Imagine that you were Peter and you walked down that mountain with Jesus and you saw your friend Andrew, your brother Andrew, and Andrew couldn't cast that demon out. And you remembered the last time you cast a demon out in Bethsaida. What's wrong with you, Andrew? I cast demons out every now and again. That's what we do as Christians sometimes, right? We look at the weakness of another person and we say, "What's wrong with you? I have that fine." But Jesus revealed in this story, he revealed sometimes what the other guy is facing is bigger than what you faced when you succeeded. It's this kind. That's different than what Peter had cast out. This kind that Andrew failed with, this kind can come out by nothing but prayer and fasting. There are times when we need a very specific, intentional coming into God's presence, waiting for him to reveal, this is the way, this is the timing, my strength is sufficient for you. So you have two choices. You can dwell on the problem, like the scribes were trying to force them to do. You can't do this, and it just gets worse. Or you can appeal to the source of power. Why couldn't you cast him out? Or why could we not cast him out? And he says this kind comes out with nothing but prayer and fasting. Instead of focusing on, why can't I do this? I can focus on, well, I can't, but he can. Amen. Let me come to him about this. I'll close with a story about Debbie's father. He became a Seventh-day Adventist at an inconvenient time. Through a long sequence of events that I'll summarize, someone introduced him to this Adventist girl out in California while he was serving in the Navy, and they said she's blonde. He said, "So what else is wrong with her?" He didn't like blonde at the time, but he came to like blonde a lot. But Seventh-day Adventist, he never heard, what is that? But they got to know each other, and he came to study the Bible, and he realized, wait a minute, what I see here is Bible-based. It's substantial. It answers some questions in my life. This kind of stuff, he never expressed it quite that way. I'm putting those words in his mouth. But he believed, and he was baptized as a Seventh-day Adventist, and he began living that way. And then there's a challenge. Usually on Sabbaths, on Saturdays, he was able to take that time for worship and not have to work. They gave him that concession. But the squadron, he was a jet mechanic in the military, in the Navy, and his squadron, for some reason or another, needed to get intensive more training to pass the next inspection. And so the commander told the whole group, you must all work, and he mentioned the time period, which included Saturday coming up. So my father-in-law, well, I didn't know him at the time, but he went to talk to, I wasn't born yet at the time. Anyway, he walked up to his commander and said, sir, I need to have something to the effect of, I need to have a concession made on this because I worship on the Bible Sabbath. Nope, there are no exceptions. You must be there or you will be court-martialed. Well, what do? Are you going to stand for your faith, or are you going to, say, I can't do it? Sort of like the disciples, we tried and nothing happened. I tried appealing to the commander, and he said no. He said it's not possible. And the temptation is to pray that if you can. And Jesus would come back and say, if you can, all things are possible. I don't understand why God answers the way he answers from time to time. The way he answered the question that day, on Friday, the jet plane that the commander was flying crashed into San Francisco Bay. He wasn't alive on Sabbath to force my father-in-law to work. Sometimes that doesn't end that way. But God chose to take this person who was new in his faith and maybe not as strong as he would be later, and he gave him strength to stand no matter what, like another man standing for another day. Eric Little, the runner, you remember, who tried to stand for what he understood to be the Lord's Day Sunday, not racing. Immediately the father said, I believe. Help my unbelief. I can do that this week. When I face this stuff, I don't know what's next. It's like I let go of that. I give it to you. Help my unbelief. So my challenge for you, it's in the bulletin if you want to review it. Identify one thing in your life that only God can change and take it to him this week. It may be different next week, another thing. And you can say basically, I do believe you can deal with this. Please help my unbelief. We have one more song as we close, and our singers will return.